Hello everyone, James Donaldson here, and I'm bringing you a video on how a person should go about selecting a suppressor. There's a lot of videos, everything you need to know about suppressors and all that kind of jazz, but I possess, honestly, so many I don't remember the exact number. I think it's 15. But, so I've used 15 different suppressors, gotten very intimate with them. That's just kind of weird. That's not, I have a very intimate knowledge. I'm very familiar with them, is what I'm trying to say. Sorry, it's late. They're very much like tools, just like anything else. What kind of bait do you want to use? Well, what fish are you trying to catch? What kind of optic do I want? Well, it depends on what you're doing. Same thing with the suppressor. So getting into the gentleman's disclosure, what I'm going to be talking about is my method. I think anyone can find a lot of good things in hearing me out, but in the end, everyone should devise their own system. So hopefully this is more food for thought. However much it does or does not waver from my method when you come up with your own, it is up to you. So I will mention two final things in the gentleman's disclosure. All things were acquired through a third party, so I don't really have any relationship with any of these companies that are making these suppressors. And also, I do want to mention there's down there in the description, I have a table of contents you can jump around the videos. So if you're looking for specific information in my videos, I try to make it pretty easy for you to find so you don't have to watch the whole thing. So, let's get to it. So, getting right into the meat and potatoes, first and foremost, does sound actually matter? A lot of guys say, even some guys I think have pretty good channels, will then tell you you're a FUD for being concerned about sound. No, you're just not. That is such a ludicrous thing. And I used to hear that parroted more often before things like Pew Science, where they were really measuring. But sound is very important. That's one of the reasons you're buying the damn thing. So in some cases, it's going to matter more than others. I'm not saying you shouldn't care about sound, but you need to think of your criteria, depending on what you're doing, as an ordered list. There are scenarios where suppression is the top priority for me choosing a can. There are other scenarios where it's third or fourth. So, yes, sound matters. And also, sound matters because if you have a can that has decent suppression at sea level, and you live in Colorado, well, the speed of sound is less high in Colorado than it is in Florida. So, something else to consider, if you're on the bleeding edge, and you're like, oh, it's okay, it's good enough, it's like, no, because your can's definitely not hearing safe at all for even one shot when you're hunting elk in Colorado. It's just not. So physics and things play a role. Now getting into the next part, Pew Science and the Sound Performance Standard. It's an excellent resource. It's helpful, especially if you already own several cans that are on there, so you can kind of gauge. Sometimes it's like, holy shit, my 300 blackout is quieter than this, with for instance, my Hyperion, it's quieter than if I was to run X 9mm can on whatever pistol. So it's very good to use. Also, it kind of tells you the range. So Jay on a podcast he talked about, and I kind of do this too, is depending on what he's doing, okay, so sound isn't the top priority, but his tests are in the free field, as he explains. Sound bounces off, just like explosions, just kinds of like all other kinds of things. So if you're then closer to the ground or lying on the ground or you're in a blind, I mean, there's so many factors that go into it. So you might want a can that's in the 40 score range. Not super quiet, but it's going to do the job as far as you not having to wear ear protection, even just to fire one shot. So very important resource, very good things to consider. Use it when you're figuring out what can is going to be best for you. So first and foremost, let's get into can selection, right? Okay, what suppressor do I buy? Well, first off, what weapon system? So, shotgun. Do you really need one? What are your use cases? I have a review, good God, I hate that word. I have a video on my analysis of the Salvo 12. It's the only shotgun suppressor I've done. Shotgun suppressors for me are more of a CQB thing, or home defense, or something like that, where shotguns are loud. So you're trying to kind of cut that out in a dwelling, home, building, apartment building, whatever, where sound's going to be bouncing off stuff. Again, it goes back to sound suppression. But there's some complication to shotgun suppressors, and at the end of the day, they're not that great. So if you're turkey hunting, I mean, it might protect your hearing some, or a fair amount, but you're not going to impress your friends. Now, shooting subsonic loads, through, it's slugs or buckshot or whatever, that's one of those fun, like cool, impress your friend things. But so for shotgun, there's some out there. It's much less of a priority. I don't really care for shotgun suppressors at all. So maybe you use shotguns all the time for everything. Maybe that is something you want to investigate then. But for me, where I hardly use shotguns, and for what I'm doing with them, the suppressor is going to have a fairly negative impact, like shooting clays or something like that. Again, I could get used to it. It's just not my thing, and I really don't strongly recommend it. As far as a salvo, if you have to have one, it's okay for a shotgun cam, but I don't really have a lot to compare it to because it's the only one I've used. Now, getting into rifle, this is a whole array of things. Are you hunting with it? Is it for your AR? What caliber is your AR? What kind of AR is it? Something like an MCX, I'm going to recommend a flow-through suppressor. Something like a Huxworks, which I can recommend because I've been using. And then there's like Cat. I can't recommend that because I haven't used it. I've never even seen one in person, so I'm not going to recommend it. But I know that some people say great things about them, and it is a flow-through style. And there are other cans that are kind of in between, maybe something you want to look into. We'll talk a little bit more on that in a minute. Now, getting to pistol, pistol cans make more sense for pistol caliber carbines, which is a weapon system that doesn't make a ton of sense to me in the first place. I'm not dogging you if you have one. They're cool as shit, by all means. And if that's what makes sense for your use case, we're not here to talk about use case of pistol caliber carbines, but it works for your use case, keep rocking it. I'm not dogging you. I'm just saying I don't see a lot of application for them. Point with pistol suppressors is, pistols can be extremely finicky. So as cool as it is to have a suppressed pistol, there's not as much necessity. Now to me, if I'm going to have a rifle, it's going to have a suppressor on it. Not the case for the shotgun, not as much of a case for the pistol. Again, what are you doing with it? Are you a clandestine operator? Probably have a suppressor on it. But if you're not, and you're just some dude, and you want to have it because it looks cool, and it looks cool at the range, get it. Like, this is America. Buy whatever you want. Except people. Don't buy people. But suppressor, pistol cans, whatever. I just kind of want to set some realism in what it's actually going to be used for. I have a suppressor on my home defense gun. That's because it's tiny, it's a limited use, and it fits on the gun in the gun safe. So for me, that was an application. Again, we'll get into specific applications in a minute, but I'm kind of walking you through. Next. So next, the use. Hunting would be the first one. You're going to want, we're really sticking with rifles for this, but you're going to want a lighter weight, smaller size. Lighter weight, that could correlate to size. It can also correlate to material. You're not really beating the shit out of a hunting can through a bolt-action rifle. So I would recommend a titanium can. You're also not trying to, again, I'm talking about hunting animals here, not people or anything. But titanium, there's some sparking in the dark. Well, you really shouldn't be hunting in the dark. If you are hunting pig or something, you're probably using an AR. Anyway, probably not going to use titanium. But something like elk, deer, whatever, even coyote, the titanium really isn't going to be much of a problem. So titanium material is going to be super light, and then also smaller size. You don't want some huge can because you're going to want your gun to be able to move around a little bit. You can find some decently small cans with some pretty good sound suppression. So that would be kind of something I'm looking at. Also, sound suppression isn't going to weigh as much for a hunting can because I'm really just trying to protect my hearing is all I'm trying to do. Again, I want to factor in what kind of environment am I hunting in. Am I going to want a little bit of a quieter can because I'm going to be around trees and other obstructions? Again, things to think about. So, moving on to the next. So home defense, or really self-defense is what I should say. Probably a smaller size, just so it's a little more wieldy, kind of like the hunting scenario. And then you definitely want a robust one. So you're looking at like Inconel, maybe stainless steel, although it's going to be heavier, but it's also going to be less expensive than something like Inconel. So cost, of course, is a factor, I understand. Sometimes I leave out cost in my videos because it's not relevant to what I'm talking about. In this case, cost is definitely a factor, especially for somebody on a budget. Technically, everyone's on a budget. We just have different budgets. So robust is going to be a really big thing because you can shred on an AR, but you can burn up a can, especially a titanium can. So you're going to want to go with something that's a higher grade of material. It's going to handle that heat better. So another kind of thing with that is what it's doing with that heat. If it's venting, if it's cooling, all that kind of stuff. Apparently the cat cans cool really fast, partly because of how they manage the gas flowing out. That's awesome. So again, things to think about. The competition, you're going to want repeatable accuracy. I don't shoot competition, so I don't know all the ins and outs of when you use a suppressor, when you don't, but ideally you're going to be able to have the same impact, point of impact, if you will, with the can on it or not, or at the very least you want very minimal. Now I understand from the friends and people I know through work and other places that Thunder Beast is renowned for minimal point of impact shift. So that would be an example of a can people are going to get because it works very well for their competition. Now, not that you couldn't use another model of Thunder Beast can for harder use, but personally, I would recommend a different brand for that kind of thing. So, moving on. Something I will add to competition is you're not going to be as concerned about length. So, like a CGS Hyperion, that can's 9.5 inches long. It's pretty huge. It's also big in diameter, which of course isn't as big of an issue for a rifle, especially one with a magnified optic. So basically not iron sights. And so, that's not really as big of a deal because you're going to be on a bench with it. You're not carrying it around the woods, wandering around, something like that. Now getting into offense, direct action, SWAT team, infantry, special forces, all the cool, sexy stuff, dev group, you definitely want heavy duty. I mean, these things are going to get banged around on vehicles, they're going to banged around on walls, doorways. You might fire a lot. You probably have a weapon that has full auto capabilities, select fire. So you're really going to beat the shit out of this can. So you're going to need to start at a higher tier where the can's going to be able to handle it. Definitely materials are going to come into play, so something like Inconel, if you're likely to beat the shit out of this can, I wouldn't do anything except Inconel, with, I guess there's one exception, something like Cobalt or Stellite. Now direct action, I do also want to throw out that versus some of the other disciplines, flash suppression is pretty huge, so it'd be high up on the list. So direct action, we're talking like flash suppression might even be the first one, if not materials. So material, flash suppression, size, and then sound would be fourth. Whereas like hunting, material is going to be up there as far as I'm probably going to want titanium so I can have something light and all that good jazz. Now something to consider getting into back pressure. Back pressure doesn't matter as much with something like a bolt action gun for hunting or something like that. It is nice to do your gun, to be gentle on it, but you're going to have to do some tuning with your AR-15 if you're putting a can on it. And some cans are going to require more tuning, like my Gemtech G5, extremely gassy can, however very quiet, also very heavy, not very long. So it's kind of, in the middle there of the diagram. But if you're looking at something like a Huxworks Flow 556K, very durable can, good materials, and it's going to flow stuff out. So you're not creating this cloud of gas that's basically poisonous as you're firing indoors. And with that, you're not, you're not creating, an environment where it's hard to see or your eyes are watering or anything like that. So you're also not cutting into your visibility. Is there a cloud in front of you now? Maybe that cuts into visibility a little bit, but you can also move. And you should be moving, because in that scenario, you are shooting, moving, and communicating, not necessarily in that order. Now, there's a range toy category, right? Hollywood quiet, that kind of thing. That is a scenario in which you might want it to be as quiet as possible. Or hunting varmint, and you're in an area where you don't really want to bother your neighbors. So just kind of that realm. Now, if you're super secret dude, and you can get really good suppression without really the backlash of some of the other factors, awesome, do that. So yeah, definitely a criteria there. So getting to range toy, I mean, you want to show off. You want it to be cool. There's nothing kind of more disappointing than like, hey, shoot my suppressed rifle, and your friend who's never shot one's like, shoots it, and they're like, that's kind of loud. One of the reasons that I always have them fire a couple rounds unsuppressed, and then I suppress it. But, it's unfortunate. So there is that category there, I would say. And it's no less relevant than the other ones. Just be honest about what you're doing and buy according to that. Now, there's really two kind of main baffle types or executions, and it's not going to be monocore and baffle stack because they're kind of intermingling with the creation of 3D printing technology. So they're really going to be low back pressure and then kind of high back pressure, and maybe there's really three categories like in the middle, depending on how baffle stacks are being done. But basically low back pressure is going to have less gas traveling back toward the shooter. And now when you suppress a gun that's semi-auto, you are speeding up and intensifying all the action that's going on. So any gun, pistol, rifle, shotgun, if it's semi-auto, it is taking more abuse than it would otherwise. So low back pressure setups are kind of nice because they don't really have anywhere near the level, if any, added abuse to your gun. Also, you don't need to tune them to have the gun work better, because what you're doing, and I've 10 years of experience in flow characteristics and flow engineering. Basically, you have the system and it's set up and you're like, good, it works in all these environments. We've even accounted for different ammo, so we've increased the pressure a little bit to make sure it cycles. Well, now you've gone and you've just screwed everything up by adding a suppressor. Now, visually, is the gun running and everything? Yeah, but you are increasing wear and changing some other factors. So by tuning the gun, you kind of undo what you undid there. Now, you have to buy parts. You may have to put in some wrench time, take it to a gunsmith. Depends on what it is and what you're doing to tune it. But low back pressure kind of negates all that, and that's a really good added benefit. SBRs are a good example. They can be kind of gassy in the first place, depending on, and they'll get really gassy with a can on it. Now you put a low back pressure can, something like the Huxworks, you don't really have to do anything. It just kind of runs like it did, other than it has a little more weight on the end and doesn't flash as much and doesn't create as much sound. So there you go. Now I will say some guns that are non-AR guns, you can't really tune. So like the MCX platform, you can't. There's not really aftermarket support. And if there was, it'd be a little tricky. Now there is a new gas valve out by a third party, and I'm going to be doing some testing on that. But that kind of will solve a lot of the issues. But having said that, there are going to be guns you can't tune, and maybe you just don't want to. So these low back pressure cans are going to be really, really good. Something I'll throw in at the end here with the low back pressure is I really mainly recommend them for semi-auto guns. There's not a ton of need to put it on a bolt gun, so that might allow you to focus on a little more quietness. Now, some of these flow-through cans are still pretty quiet, so at the end of the day, if you want one can, it's going to work on your AR and your hunting rifle, and its flow-through makes sense, then by all means. Again, use all this criteria I'm giving you to make the best choice. Now, traditional. As I said, you're going to have more gas coming back toward the shooter. They're typically quieter than flow-through, but not always. There are definitely some exceptions, and I think over time, that statement won't really be true. Now, usually less expensive is another good point, and then also, they're just simpler. They're simpler to manufacture, simpler to make. Now, with 3D printing, that statement at some point will not be true anymore, so you can kind of cross that out. Now, diameter versus length, a longer suppressor is going to do a better job suppressing than a wider one. But with more complicated baffle stacks coming out, that statement also may not be true one day. Something to consider. But in terms of pressure moving forward, path of least resistance, so when it's bleeding off in a bunch of baffles versus having a big baffle up front or big couple baffles, it's just going to suppress better when you have a longer can. Now, can you make up? If you have to have a shorter can you make up for some of that with a bigger can? Yes. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. So, anyway, there's a balance there for sure, but at this point, there's so many factors to worry about. Really, length, weight, flash suppression, sound suppression, all those things are going to matter more than necessarily the diameter of the can. So, I have found that when it comes to pistols, the diameter of the can, even cans that are iron sight friendly, really aren't. Now, most cases I'm using a red dot, so it's going to see over really any suppressor somewhat. And at the end of the day, you can really see through the can. When you're shooting with both eyes open, I've never had an issue just using normal height sights with a suppressor. In fact, all my 45s, I shouldn't say all of them, several of the 45s on my 45 caliber handgun project, several of them have normal height sights, and it's not an issue running them suppressed. It's not even something I think about. So don't feel like you need to get suppressor height sights. I only do if I'm going to run an optic, or that's just how the gun came. Getting into mounting, this is a pretty big thing. There are some options as far as pistols go. You've got some like basically quick attach, and then also some that are like a cam lock, where the cam lock is a quick attach, and there's one that's very similar, but you do thread it a couple times. Mostly pistols are going to be threaded, and the thread pattern matters. The metric threads, the turn is with the gas flow because you have the landing grooves, the rifling of the barrel, and so it's going to twist one way or the other. However, there's way more threads, so for a 1/2x28 standard thread to walk off would take some threads. Although, again, you never know. You could get a baffle strike, that kind of thing. So thinking about these things is important to consider. Now, I have not had baffle strikes using 1/2x28, but I also pay pretty good attention, and also some of my cans just stay on better than others. One thing I like about the Osprey, for as much as I don't like it, is that it can only walk off so much, and if it does, it's pretty obvious that it's doing it. So you can combat that a bit. Now, I have a Gen 1 Osprey, maybe the 2s and at some point 3s are going to be better, but for me, I don't recommend them. There's a video on that actually. So yeah, now getting to rifles, right? Direct thread versus QD. If you're using a QD or some form of mounting muzzle device, the can's pretty much never going to walk off. And in the case of the Hux Works, it is threaded onto its own muzzle device because they want to use a certain thread pattern that is anti-twist. That son of a bitch is hard to get off. I have to use a strap wrench to remove the Hux Works from my gun it's been on because it's been torquing itself down using the gas flow. Now, something like a Surefire RC2, that's been one of the better ones. I haven't had as much carbon lock. It does stick kind of sometimes, but I'm actually kind of able to hit it and get it loose. I haven't had to use their even recommended method of using a blank to fire it off or even a live round. And then honestly, the Gemtech bilock mounting system has been the best. I haven't had accuracy issues with it, even though I've seen that people have. I haven't had any accuracy issues, and I hardly had any carbon lock ever. And part of that was I was really good about once the can cooled after a range visit, I would, even if I put it right back on, I would remove it. So that can be said about the bilock system. It's not very common. It's kind of dying, if not already dead. But if you see an old Gemtech can out there, or a way to mount it to a current can you have, maybe something you consider. Now, going back to direct thread, you're getting a good connection to the gun. So it's going to be better, a little better for POI shift and fighting that. Now, it's something that I don't care for is you have those threads exposed all the time versus like a Surefire mount, there's no threading. So really, I mean, you're basically going to have to take a hammer and a tool and just bash the shit out of that metal, which is going to be a task in and of itself to really screw up the suppressor's ability to mount to the muzzle device. Whereas my MCX that I carry around in a bag, it has the threads exposed. And I put a little cap on it, a plastic cap, just to kind of protect it. I don't think anything crazy is going to happen, but the cap will basically take the brunt of the force, if not all of it, and protect the threads. Thread protectors are out there. They walk off, in my experience, when you're firing the gun. So there's that. Now my 716i 308, so I really just used the muzzle device that it came with as the thread protector, and then I unscrew it and put the SIG can on when I'm going to fire it. It's set to pretty much be fired, always suppressed. So mount versus thread, definitely a lot to consider there. Things to weigh in. Again, what are you doing? My hunting gun happens to have the Gemtech mount on it because that's the way I set it up at the time. Had it a little customized, so it really doesn't make sense to undo that. And so I'm just going to keep running it, but I also don't have any issues with it. Yes, as I mentioned before, POI shift, but it's always getting fired suppressed, so it doesn't really matter. So, moving on from there. With mounting and thread, I do want to touch on the deal with some barrels. I wish it was all of them. It's currently not. They have a taper versus, I want to say it's 15 degrees or something, but versus a 90-degree shoulder. And so You either have to have an adapter or a can that fits that. And so I'll be talking in a minute about a scenario where I needed a can that fit it, and that was a factor. But I don't want to mount a bunch of adapters onto each other and introduce more threads and technically more failure points. I just want to get as direct as I can. And so sometimes that's going to be adding a mount, and sometimes that's no mount. And so that's definitely a consideration one should consider. Round optimization. Basically, you want to have your can set up for the round that you are using. So 308 for 308, 300 blackout for 300 blackout, 9mm for 9mm. Instead of using 45 for 9mm or 308 for 556, get a 556. It's not just sound stuff, it's just overall performance. When you really get into the nitty details, the suppressor was designed for a certain round and certain use case, and that's how you want to purchase it. So I understand if you get an initial can, 308 say, or 30 cal can, and using on some 556 till you get a 556 can. That is one thing. However, if your plan is just to get a 30 cal can and that's your can, I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's not really the right way to do it. Think right tool for the right job. You're not going to use a tree saw to cut a 2x4. You can, and if you have to, you have to, but ideally, you're going to have a few different saws depending on what you're cutting. You're definitely not using a wood saw to cut metal. So, again, something to think about. So price is a consideration, and you're going to pay for names, you're going to pay for materials, and you're going to pay for designs. That's just how it is. And there are some good budget ones out there. Otter Creek, I've never used any of their products, but everything I've seen has been really good. Plus, no one bats 1,000. And so when there is an issue, you want to be working with a company that, one, is going to be around to cover a warranty 10 years later, but also who are actually going to cover it or make it easy for you to get the can to them to fix and then replace it. So Silencer Co. is another one I've heard about being great with customer service. I've done a little bit with them, not enough for me to really comment on it, but again, to me they're renowned for having good customer service. As Otter Creek, Surefire for different things, but that's probably a product you're hardly going to have to use their customer service. Not that that's an excuse. I don't think anyone should ever have shitty customer service, and it's irritating if you think you can just get through life with shitty customer service. So do better. So getting into caveats and variables. I know this is a long one, but remember, you can skip around down in the description. Do not compromise solely on price. Don't say, oh, here's a deal, or oh, this kind of antiquated can is $200 and it's a hard use 556 can and I can get it really cheap. You're probably going to end up with a disappointment. You're probably going to regret it. So save the money, do the research. Don't say, oh, this can is great, ooh, but this one's cheaper a lot. No. I will recommend Gunbroker is a great place to go to find deals on good cans. So that's another thing to consider. Now, Rimfire is a class of its own because you really want certain materials because you want to be able to clean them. Rimfire is extremely dirty, so you really want a Rimfire can. You also want one that you can take apart relatively easily. So baffle stacks where they're covering each other up, so like the cone and then they cover up, and so it's keeping the grime in so it doesn't get between the baffles and the tube. Makes it easy to slide the baffles out. Now you can clean it easier. If you don't do aluminum, you can use the sonic cleaner, even better. Now you don't necessarily need to get inspection quality clean, so you're okay just knocking the gunk off from the aluminum, but definitely the way the baffles are configured is a really important thing to consider. Multiple hosts, again, I feel like I've kind of touched on that, but if you do have multiple hosts, obviously find a can that's going to support that well. I've been using a Dead Air Primal, video coming at some point, but I've used it on 4570, I've used it on 45 ACP, I'm going to be trying it out on 300 Blackout. The Dead Air system is a good ecosystem to get into. It's going to be one that is going to serve you well if you are needing or wanting to do that. Now getting into brands. Brands is important because as I mentioned before, you want a brand that's going to stick around. You got boutique versus prominent versus made in a shed. All stuff to consider, and it all comes back to warranty work. Depending on, maybe you bought the wrong suppressor and you're beating the shit out of a titanium can, or again, as I said earlier, no one bats 1,000. You just got one that doesn't work. Dead Air went through a period where they had a whole line of their 5.56 ones, blanking on the name, Lazar, no, not, whatever. And they had a bunch of weld problems. So there's all kinds of reasons that you want the company to still be around to uphold the warranty. So that is something to consider. That's definitely something I think about. That's why I stick with reputable brands. I don't want to be just held with a paperweight at some point if there's a failure. Even if I have to pay to fix it, I want the people who made it to be the ones fixing it. I don't want Ted's Suppressor Shop fixing my Surefire can because they went under or something. So yeah, sticking with reputable brands, ones that are going to be really good. Plus, it carries a weight with it that you're probably going to be more confident in it, and you probably are. Your odds, right? I talk about that with guns sometimes and other stuff, is your odds of getting a bad one are also small. I'm sure Surefire's made a couple just lemons, but they're few and far between than some other companies I've seen that probably have more frequent issues. So QD recommendations, Gemtech Bilock. So kind of not recommending Gemtech, but at the same time, kind of am. Like, if you can get, somebody else could use that Bilock system, it's good. And then Surefire, I've really come to like the Surefire system. At first I didn't, now I do like it. The Huxworks is pretty good, just buy a strap wrench. Fortunately, they're not very expensive. And then I don't like the hub system. There are uses for it, and there are times where it makes sense. So I do own hub equipment, but again, it comes back to having a use for your can. If you're having a use for your can, you probably don't need the hub system. So let that be what it is. Hub is there, but don't just, in fact, I would say don't buy it because it's hub. Hub might just be a factor you have to deal with, or that's just part of it. So the Primal, it's a hub can. So I don't want the hub adapter to this mount to then quick attach to this mount. Like, I don't want all that shit. There's too much going on. Now, sometimes you can't avoid it. So running it on 45 ACP handguns, I have to have a booster. That said, I haven't really had any issues, but you're just opening yourself up to the possibility of those issues. So if you can avoid hub, do it. It's not that hub is inherently bad or poorly done. You're just introducing a lot more thread points and therefore failure or walk-off points to your system, and you don't need to be doing that. You don't want to be doing that. So carbon lock, it's a thing. It happens. Not to be confused with Huxworks cans torquing themselves on. That is different. But there's many different ways to defeat carbon lock. You just have to do some research. There's stuff you can apply. There's, again, like I said, different mounting systems. You're pretty much never going to have carbon lock with a direct mount system. Now that said, direct mount can walk off, so there's that. But things to consider. Now, department parameters, a brief thing I'll throw out there. If you're buying this for LE use or something like that, they're probably going to have preferences for what you're doing, so you're going to have to adhere to those. I don't know what those are, but it's something to consider. So multi-use, I've kind of hit it before, but I really don't recommend dual suppressors. James, you have a Dead Air Primal. It's a multi-use can. Right, but that's not why I bought it. I have it to use on 4570. And so, you know, if it came direct threaded, I probably would have done that. It's kind of nice it didn't, because I can use it on the 45s. But I probably would have preferred direct thread if I could have gotten it. Again, that said, the benefit is I can kind of do whatever threading I want, so that's nice. But again, at the end of the day, I really like the simplicity of just simple direct thread when it comes to as opposed to a system that allows for dual. Again, I understand if your first can you want to dual, so you can kind of experiment around. But at the end of the day, you really want to be optimizing your suppressor purchase for what you're going to be using it for. Now, caliber constraints, right? We got rimfire, 50 cal, 4570. You know, different cans are going to have different constraints as far as, you know, this is for 338 Lapua, but only with this barrel length. Or, you know, this can, because it's aluminum, it's only going to do 9 mil. You can do subsonic 300 blackout, but don't do super. So there's always caliber constraints. You need to read the directions, the manual, look at recommendations on the website before you just go buying it thinking, oh, I can use it on this. You may not be able to, or not on your particular gun because it's a shorter barrel. So selection process. I know this video is long, but I want to give some examples of why I selected certain suppressors or wouldn't select certain suppressors. So look at my 300 Blackout MCX. Quiet was the top priority. A close second is weight. So consider that I just wanted a Hollywood quiet gun. And there's some suffering I get from that, but mainly that it's direct thread, so I have to take the time to thread it on. It is a backpack gun, so that's something I would have to worry about, but I mean, I can thread it pretty fast. So mounting, I did want pretty simple mounting, so direct thread was going to be nice. I didn't put too much thought into the mounting, but it was something I was concerned about. How easy, hard, is it going to cause problems? Something like a Huxworks would be very hard to take back off. This is not, so benefits there. Now, materials, would have wanted non-titanium technically, but you know, it's technically a direct action gun, so non-titanium would be good, but the quality of that titanium, all that, I'm not going to have quite the level of sparking, especially, big thing being, running mostly subsonic rounds, they're just not going to spark that titanium like supersonic rounds would. So while it was kind of a priority, I prioritized sound so much that I had to make some exceptions, and so that was one of them. Gemtech 1 on my 270, works well, it's light, not that large, and I've had it a long time, and it's kind of the best use for that can, so it's kind of like, it's the best can to go with it. I would have to have it totally rethreaded to get a Hyperion on it, and the Hyperion's just so long. So at the end of the day, the Gemtech works well. Would it have been my first pick if I was to go buy a hunting suppressor now? No, but it works well for that application. Going through 5.56 cans, my G5, super quiet, however, incredibly gassy, so that's out. RC2, can't really tune the MCX, you know, or piston guns, not very well anyway, and so it wouldn't necessarily be my first pick for that. I would probably go with the Huxworks Flow 5.56K. Now, I don't have to tune an AR to use it, and I don't have to tune an MCX or whatever other piston gun. An RC2 I would, but the AR-15 isn't that hard to tune. Plus, it's on a 14.5 currently, and so it doesn't require as much tuning as like a Mark 18 would, in which case I would use a Flow 5.56K. So there's some examples there when it comes to flow. All those that I mentioned, none of them are titanium, so they're not really going to spark, and so they're going to do flash suppression very well, which is a pretty big factor of direct action. So getting into my DMR can, my SLX, which going through this process is kind of what spurred the video on, is it's a 308, so I need a 30 caliber can. It has a it has the not a 90-degree shoulder, it has the taper. So ideally, I'd like a can that fits the taper, and it isn't, the 716i is a notoriously gassy gun. So I wanted something that would basically be low back pressure or no back pressure, and so that really put it up to the Cat, the Huxworks, or the SIG, and I ended up going with the SIG partly because of the taper. The Huxworks, I probably would have done the 762 flow, but it's titanium, and for this, it's a DMR gun is the use of it, and so I didn't want titanium. That was a no-go, and so that I thought about waiting until Huxworks came out with a non-titanium can, but who knows how the hell long that was going to be. Plus I wanted to try out an SLX. So, and then the Cat, there just was, I didn't like the hub thing, and then it was possible I could go this other way, but there's just too many unknowns about the Cat, and I know everyone's saying great things about the performance and everything, but I want to give it a little more time. Now, not that SIG is perfect, because they're far from it, but it's just kind of, it's an application that made sense. And so with those things, I wanted a high flow rate, I wanted materials that were not titanium, and then size. I wanted a decent size. I could run the CGS on it. It's kind of a gassy can compared to low back pressure. So, and then in using it on the on the 716i, it was gassy. So, you know, the size, kind of one mid to smaller. I would say the SLX is kind of mid, which works for me. And so, because it comes to balancing weight, now DMR rifle pretty much is going to be stationary. but you have to get to that place, and you have to leave that place or go to another station. So yeah, I wanted to avoid having the heaviest can while balancing these other things. So that was a thought process for that. For pistol, I want a quiet can. I just do. I want a quiet can. Pressure management is a concern. So I've got Huxworks can to try out. Haven't even shot it yet. But pressure management, that stuff's coming in your face, and it's much worse than a gun out of a pistol. Especially if you're shooting Glock 19 length, Glock 45 length, which is what I primarily shoot for 9mm. And lighter materials is ideal. I really love my CGS Mod 9. It's the full size, extremely light, you barely know it's there. It does throw some stuff back in your face, is why I wanted to try the Huxworks, but that'd be an example. So that CGS for 9mm can, I very much recommend. So 4570, there's a handful of choices. I went with the Dead Air. Gas pressure management, not as crucial, because I'm using it on a lever action, so that wasn't an issue. And then materials. Materials is a little bit of an issue, but you also have to be realistic about the pressures of a 4570 are going to require something very stout to manage that. And so it was unlikely, and I think impossible, at least at the time filming this video, that I was going to get a titanium 4570 can. Now there are companies like CGS use a very special titanium, and the way they apply it in the 3D printing process, they can make it very robust, but it won't replace something like Stellite or Inconel or something along those lines, or even stainless steel when it comes to managing the heat. So those were things to consider. The close. This was a very long video. I apologize for that. When I wrote it out, I didn't realize it was going to be this long. Hopefully I've cut it up enough to make it more digestible. But I will say that at the end of the day, there's no one can that does everything great. There is always going to be a trade-off depending on what you're trying to accomplish. If you ask me what the best can is, I'm going to ask you what your needs are, and then make you make your own decisions from there. This video was designed to help you through that decision-making process so you can make an educated purchase. Until new technology comes out, you're going to need to compromise here or there, at the very least. This has been James Donaldson with The Contemporary Gentleman, and until next time, keep your composure.